Your words are sabotaging your life right now, and you don't even realize it. Every single day, you're creating problems that don't exist, destroying relationships that could have lasted, and blocking opportunities that were meant for you. And the worst part, you think you're just having a conversation. Think about the last time you said something and immediately wished you could take it back. That sick feeling in your stomach. That moment of clarity when you realize the damage was done. We've all been there, but here's what most people don't understand. It's not just about those obvious mistakes. There are specific patterns, specific circumstances where your mouth becomes your worst enemy, and you keep falling into the same traps over and over again. The ancient wisdom teaches us something profound. The tongue is small, but it can destroy kingdoms. Your words don't just disappear into the air, they create ripples that turn into waves. They build realities. They shape how people see you, how they treat you, and ultimately how you see yourself. Today we're going to look at 10 specific circumstances where your own mouth is cheating you out of the life you deserve. And I'm not talking about surface level advice like think before you speak. We're going deeper than that. We're going to explore the psychological mechanisms, the hidden patterns, and the unconscious behaviors that turn your words into weapons against yourself. Most people go through life completely unaware of how their speech patterns are creating their reality. They wonder why opportunities slip away, why relationships fall apart, why people don't trust them, why they feel misunderstood. And they never connect the dots back to the words coming out of their own mouth. The challenge isn't that you're a bad person or that you have bad intentions. The challenge is that you've developed habits, unconscious patterns of speech that feel natural, that feel like just being honest or just expressing yourself, but they're actually building walls between you and everything you want in life. When you're defending yourself from accusations that don't matter, here's the first trap. Someone makes a comment about you. Maybe it's critical. Maybe it's just their opinion. And immediately, without thinking, you jump into defense mode. You start explaining, justifying, building your case like you're in a courtroom. But here's what's really happening. That person's comment, it was just words floating in the air. It had no power. But the moment you started defending yourself, you gave it power. You turned their throwaway remark into something significant. You elevated it. You made it real. Think about it like this. Someone says, "You're always late." The moment you say, "No, I'm not always late. Remember last Tuesday when I was early? And what about that time 3 months ago?" You've just confirmed in everyone's mind, including your own, that your lateness is a thing worth discussing. You've made it a characteristic, a trait, something that defines you. The wise approach? Sometimes you just stay silent. Sometimes you acknowledge without defending. "You're right, I was late today." Period. No explanation, no justification, no building a case. Because here's the truth. People who matter don't need your defense. And people who don't matter don't deserve it. When you defend yourself against every little accusation, every little criticism, you're telling the world that these things have power over you. You're showing that your sense of self is so fragile that it needs constant protection. And people notice this. Not consciously, but they feel it. They sense the weakness. And whether they mean to or not, they'll test it again and again. There's a deeper pattern here too. Every time you defend yourself, you're actually reinforcing the very thing you're defending against. You're putting energy into it, attention into it. You're making it grow. It's like trying to put out a fire by feeding it oxygen. The more you explain why you're not something, the more that something becomes associated with you. And here's the painful part. Most of the accusations that trigger your defense mechanism, they're not even important. They're not about your character. They're not about your worth. They're just random observations from people who are dealing with their own issues, projecting their own insecurities. But you take them seriously, you make them mean something. And in doing so, you cheat yourself out of inner peace. The practice here is simple but difficult. When someone makes a comment about you, pause. Ask yourself, does this actually matter? Does this define me? Or is this just noise? If it's noise, let it be noise. Don't turn it into a symphony. When you're trying to prove your intelligence or knowledge, the second circumstance is subtle but devastating. You're in a conversation, and someone brings up a topic, and immediately you feel this urge, this need to show that you know about this too. that you're informed, that you're intelligent. So you start talking. You start sharing everything you know about the subject. You start using certain words, certain phrases that signal your expertise. But here's what's actually happening. You're not contributing to the conversation. You're performing. You're putting on a show, and everyone can sense it. There's a difference between sharing knowledge and showing off knowledge. And that difference is felt, not heard. When you speak just to prove you're smart, you're actually communicating the opposite. You're communicating insecurity. You're saying, I need you to think I'm intelligent because I'm not sure I am. Real intelligence doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to prove anything. It shows up naturally when it's needed. Think about the people you truly respect. The ones you consider wise. Do they jump into every conversation with their credentials? Do they constantly remind you of what they know? Or do they listen more than they speak? Do they ask questions? Do they make space for others? There's something fascinating that happens when you resist this urge to prove your intelligence. People actually start seeing you as more intelligent. Because confidence is quiet, insecurity is loud. When you can sit in a conversation, hear people discuss topics you know about, and not feel the need to broadcast your knowledge, you're displaying a level of self-assurance that's rare. And here's another layer. When you're always trying to prove you know things, you stop learning. Because you can't learn when you're talking. You can't discover new perspectives when you're busy defending your current ones. Your need to appear knowledgeable actually keeps you ignorant. The trap goes even deeper. Often when you're proving your intelligence, you're not even accurate. You're pulling from half-remembered articles, from things you heard somewhere, from assumptions you've made. But you present them as facts, as certainties. And when you're wrong, which happens more often than you think, you damage your credibility far more than if you had just said, I don't know much about that. There's tremendous power in the phrase, I don't know. It's honest. It's humble. It invites real conversation. It creates space for learning. But we've been conditioned to believe that not knowing is weakness, that we should always have an opinion, always have an answer. This conditioning is cheating you out of wisdom. The practice here is to catch yourself in the moment. Feel that urge to prove yourself, that itch to show what you know, and instead of scratching it, just observe it. Notice how uncomfortable it is to let someone else be the expert, to let someone else share knowledge without adding your piece. That discomfort, that's your ego. And your ego is not your friend when you're filling silence with unnecessary words. The third circumstance is one most people don't even recognize. Silence appears in a conversation, maybe just a few seconds, and immediately you feel this panic, this need to fill it. So you start talking. You start saying things just to say them, random observations, unnecessary details, things that don't add value to anyone. But silence isn't empty. Silence is full. It's full of presence. It's full of space for thoughts to form, for feelings to settle, for understanding to emerge. When you fill every silence with words, you're preventing all of that. You're creating noise where there should be music. Here's what happens on a deeper level. When you can't tolerate silence, you can't tolerate yourself. Because in silence, you meet yourself, your thoughts, your feelings, your discomfort. And if you're always running from that through talking, you're running from your own existence. People sense this too. When you're uncomfortable with silence, they become uncomfortable with you, because your anxiety becomes their anxiety. Your need to fill space makes them feel like space is something wrong, something to be fixed. And conversations become exhausting instead of energizing. There's also a practical problem. When you fill silence with unnecessary words, you dilute everything you say. Your important points get lost in a sea of filler. People stop listening carefully because they've learned that most of what comes out of your mouth is just noise. You've trained them not to pay attention. Think about the most powerful speakers you've ever heard, the ones who truly impact you. They use silence. They pause. They let their words sink in. They create rhythm. They understand that what you don't say is just as important as what you do say, maybe more important. The fear of silence often comes from a fear of judgment. You think that if you're not talking, people are judging you. They're thinking you're boring or awkward or that you have nothing to contribute. But the opposite is true. When you're comfortable with silence, you appear confident, grounded, at ease with yourself. And these qualities are magnetic. There's another aspect to this. When you're always talking, you're not observing. You're not reading the room. You're not noticing body language, energy shifts, unspoken dynamics. You're missing most of what's actually being communicated because you're too busy broadcasting. The practice here is uncomfortable at first. Let silence exist. When it appears, resist the urge to fill it. Count to 5 in your head. See what happens. Usually, one of two things occurs. Either someone else fills it with something more meaningful than what you would have said, or the silence itself serves a purpose. It allows a moment of reflection, of connection, of rest. And when you do speak after silence, your words carry more weight. They matter more because they're chosen, not automatic. They're intentional, not reactive. This is how you develop a voice that people actually listen to. When you're speaking from emotion without processing it first, the fourth circumstance is probably the most destructive. Something happens that triggers you. You feel anger, hurt, frustration, fear. And immediately, while you're still flooded with that emotion, you speak. You react. You say things that feel justified in the moment but create damage that lasts far beyond the moment. Here's the mechanism. When you're in an emotional state, you're not thinking clearly. Your primitive brain has taken over. The part of you that's designed for survival, not for wisdom. And from that state, you interpret everything as a threat. Every comment is an attack. Every situation is urgent. Every feeling demands immediate expression. But emotions are temporary. They're weather patterns moving through you. They're not facts. They're not truth. They're signals, yes, but they're not instructions. When you speak from the middle of an emotional storm, you're letting the storm speak, not you. And storms destroy things. Think about the relationships you've damaged, the opportunities you've lost, the situations you've made worse. How many of them happened because you spoke while you were angry, while you were hurt, while you were scared? And how many times have you looked back and thought, if I had just waited, if I had just given myself some time, I would have handled that completely differently? The problem is we've been taught that expressing our emotions is always healthy, that holding them in is repression. But there's a difference between processing emotions and weaponizing them. There's a difference between healthy expression and emotional dumping. When you unload your unprocessed emotions onto someone else through your words, you're not being authentic, you're being destructive. Here's what actually happens in those moments. You say things you don't mean. Or worse, you say things you do mean, but in a way that's designed to hurt. You exaggerate. You bring up the past. You attack character instead of addressing behavior. You make absolute statements. You always. You never. And these words, once spoken, can't be taken back. The other person hears these words and they stick. They remember them. Even if you apologize later, even if you say you didn't mean it, there's a part of them that holds on to what you said. Because in moments of emotion, people believe you're revealing your true feelings. And maybe you are. But true feelings can be distorted by the lens of emotion. There's also the problem of escalation. When you speak from emotion, you usually trigger emotion in the other person, and then they speak from emotion. And suddenly you're not having a conversation anymore. You're in a battle. And in battles, the goal is to win, to hurt, to defend, not to understand, not to resolve, not to connect. The damage isn't just external. Every time you speak from unprocessed emotion, you reinforce a pattern in yourself. You teach yourself that immediate reaction is normal, that you can't control yourself, that your feelings control you. And over time, this becomes your identity. You become someone with a temper, someone who's sensitive, someone who can't handle stress. And these labels limit you. The practice here requires a commitment. When you feel strong emotion rising, especially anger or hurt, you need a circuit breaker. A pattern interrupt. Some people count to 10. Some people physically leave the room. Some people take deep breaths. It doesn't matter what the technique is. What matters is that you create space between the feeling and the speaking. And in that space, something important happens. You get to choose. You get to ask yourself, what do I actually want here? Do I want to hurt this person? Do I want to be right? Or do I want to resolve this? Do I want to improve this relationship? And from that place of choice, your words become tools for building instead of weapons for destroying. When you're making promises, you can't keep to avoid present discomfort. The fifth circumstance is insidious because it feels like you're being kind. Someone asks you for something, or you see an opportunity to help, or you want someone to like you, to see you as reliable, as capable. So you say yes. You make promises. You commit to things. But deep down you know you can't follow through, or you're not sure you can. But you say it anyway because saying no in that moment feels harder than dealing with the consequences later. This is how you cheat yourself in the most fundamental way. Every promise you make that you don't keep chips away at your self-respect. Every commitment you break erodes your sense of integrity, not just in the eyes of others, but in your own eyes. And eventually you stop trusting yourself. Here's how the pattern works. Someone asks you to do something. Maybe help them move. Maybe attend an event. Maybe take on a project. And in that moment, saying no feels uncomfortable. You imagine their disappointment, their judgment. You think about how they'll see you as unhelpful, as unavailable, as selfish. So you say yes. You agree. You make the promise. And you feel relief. You've avoided the immediate discomfort. But you've just traded a small, temporary discomfort for a much larger, lasting one. Because now you have this commitment hanging over you. This thing you know you probably won't do, or won't do well, or don't actually want to do. And every time you think about it, you feel guilt, anxiety, dread. It starts draining your energy before you even attempt it. And then comes the actual breaking of the promise. Maybe you cancel last minute. Maybe you don't show up. Maybe you do show up, but half-heartedly, resentfully, making everyone wish you hadn't come. And the damage is worse than if you had just said no in the first place. Because now you've disappointed someone. Now you've proven yourself unreliable. Now you've created a real problem instead of just a moment of awkwardness. There's a deeper layer to this pattern. When you make promises you can't keep, you're lying. Not always intentionally, but you're distorting reality. You're presenting yourself as someone you're not. Someone who has more time, more energy, more capacity than you actually have. And this creates a false image that you then have to maintain or defend. It's exhausting. The impact on relationships is significant. People start learning they can't count on your word. They stop believing your yeses. They stop trusting your commitments. And ironically, the very thing you were trying to avoid by saying yes constantly, which is people thinking poorly of you, happens anyway. But now it's worse because they don't just think you're unavailable, they think you're unreliable. There's also what this does to your opportunities. When you're constantly overcommitted because you can't say no, you have no space for the things that actually matter. The real opportunities, the genuine connections, the work that aligns with your purpose. You're too busy trying to fulfill promises you shouldn't have made to people who would have understood if you'd just been honest. And here's the most painful part. You know this about yourself. You know that when you say yes, there's a good chance you won't follow through, but you keep doing it. Because the pattern is comfortable. The immediate relief of avoiding confrontation feels better than the long-term reward of building integrity. The practice here is about honoring future you. When someone asks you for something, don't respond immediately. Say, let me check my schedule, or let me think about that, or simply, I need to get back to you. Give yourself time to consider if you actually want to do this, if you actually can do this. And if the answer is no, or even maybe, then say no. Learning to say no is learning to say yes to yourself. Every no to something that doesn't serve you is a yes to something that does. Every declined commitment is space for an authentic one. And people respect honesty far more than they respect reluctant agreement, followed by disappointing performance. Your word should mean something. Not just to others, but to yourself. When you say you'll do something, you should know you'll do it. And when you can't, you should be honest about that up front. This is how you build a life of integrity. This is how you build self-trust. And self-trust is the foundation of everything else. Now let's look at how these 5 circumstances interconnect and reinforce each other. Because they're not separate problems. They're different expressions of the same core issue. You're using your words to avoid discomfort instead of using them to create clarity. When you defend yourself unnecessarily, when you prove your intelligence, when you fill silence, when you speak from emotion, when you make empty promises, you're running from something. You're running from vulnerability, from uncertainty, from the reality that you can't control what people think, that you can't always appear perfect. That discomfort is part of being human. and your mouth becomes the escape route. Words become the way you try to manipulate reality, to shape perception, to avoid pain. But it doesn't work. It never works. Because authentic communication isn't about control. It's about connection. It's about truth. And truth requires the very vulnerability you're trying to avoid. There's a pattern that develops over time. The more you use these speech patterns, the more isolated you become. Because people can't connect with your performance. They can't trust your inconsistency. They can't relax around your inability to be still. They can't respect your lack of self-awareness. So they maintain distance. And you interpret that distance as proof that you need to work harder at these very patterns that created the distance in the first place. It's a cycle. You defend yourself because you feel judged. People pull back because your defensiveness is off-putting. You feel more judged. You defend more. You try to prove your worth through showing your knowledge. People see through it. You feel inadequate. You try harder to prove yourself. You fill silence because you're afraid of being boring. People tune you out because you won't stop talking. You talk more to regain their attention. Breaking this cycle requires seeing it clearly, not judging yourself for it, but understanding how it works. Every time you catch yourself in one of these patterns, you have a choice. Continue the pattern or pause. And in that pause, choose differently. Here's the crucial realization. Your mouth isn't cheating you because it's broken. It's cheating you because you're using it for the wrong purpose. You're using it to protect your ego instead of to express your truth. You're using it to control outcomes instead of to share experience. You're using it to avoid present discomfort instead of to build future trust. The moment of transformation comes when you understand this. Words are creative. They don't just describe reality, they create it. Every time you speak, you're building something. The question is, what are you building? When you defend yourself constantly, you're building an identity of someone who needs defending. Someone weak, someone threatened. Is that who you want to be? When you prove your intelligence constantly, you're building an identity of someone who's unsure, someone who needs validation, someone who's performing instead of being. Is that who you want to be? When you fill silence constantly, you're building an identity of someone who's uncomfortable with themselves, someone who's running, someone who can't be still. Is that who you want to be? When you speak from unprocessed emotion constantly, you're building an identity of someone who's unstable, someone who can't be trusted with difficult conversations, someone who's controlled by their reactions. Is that who you want to be? When you make promises you can't keep constantly, you're building an identity of someone who's unreliable, someone whose word means nothing, someone who can't be counted on. Is that who you want to be? These identities aren't permanent. They're not your nature. They're just patterns, habits. And habits can be changed. But first you have to see them. You have to catch yourself in the act. And you have to care enough about your future to endure present discomfort. The alternative is simple but not easy. Let them reveal instead of conceal. This doesn't mean becoming someone else. It means becoming more yourself, your true self. The one underneath the patterns, underneath the conditioning, underneath the fear. So we've explored 5 major circumstances where your mouth sabotages your life. When you defend against accusations that don't matter, you give them power. When you prove your intelligence, you reveal your insecurity. When you fill silence, you prevent connection. When you speak from unprocessed emotion, you create damage. When you make promises you can't keep, you destroy trust, especially with yourself. But knowing these patterns isn't enough. You have to catch them as they happen. You have to develop awareness. And that awareness comes from practice, from paying attention, from being willing to be uncomfortable as you change. Start with just one. Pick the pattern that resonates most, the one you recognize most clearly in your own life. And for the next week, just notice it. Don't try to change it yet. Just see it. See how often it happens. See what triggers it. See how it feels in your body right before you do it. This awareness alone will start to shift things. Because you can't change what you can't see. And once you see clearly, choice becomes possible. Your words are powerful, more powerful than you realize. They're shaping your relationships, your opportunities, your sense of self. So use them wisely, use them sparingly, use them with intention. Remember, silence is often wiser than speech. Restraint is often stronger than reaction. Truth is always more compelling than performance. Your mouth can be your greatest asset or your worst enemy. The difference is consciousness. The difference is choice. The difference is practice. Subscribe if this helped you see something you couldn't see before.